Good afternoon. This is Michelle Padilla. I am the host of the Awarness show. And today I have Danielle. Danielle, I don't know how to pronounce your last name. You're going to have to help me out on that one.
It's UZadder.
Huh?
Lou,
Oh.
yeah.
See, that is a unique last name. So Daniel's going to tell me what he does and how long he's been an author and what new books are out there. So Daniel, let's start with how you got to become an author and a journalist.
Well, it was a long and torturous road. It actually started out when I was still in high school, and not because I knew what I wanted to be or had any idea that I might end up as a writer, but I was flunking my sophomore English class. And so my mother sent me to a tutor who was an English teacher at the local college, and she tried for several weeks to get me to understand how grammar worked. Finally, threw up her hands and said, I don't think, kid, you're ever going to learn this. And so take this notebook and just write about what you see and bring it back. I'll show you how to fake the grammar.
There you go.
That sounds like a great idea. So I did that and I brought it back. I gave it to her. She started reading and she started to cry.
Uh-oh.
She, I thought, can this be so bad that it makes this poor woman cry? And she said, no, don't let anybody try to teach you grammar again. You just go right. You have a talent for it. And she introduced me to the college's poet laureate, who kind of took me under wing and taught me about words and sounds of words and things like that. And then when I was 17 years old, I got a crack at a newspaper position, and I wound up as a teenage police reporter. And I went from an evangelical background to learning all about life and its daily unfoldings and all of its excitement. And so I kind of got hooked on the adrenaline rush of doing stories on deadline and being out in the world and writing about what I saw. And I turned that into a column writing position eventually for a daily newspaper, and we won a Pulitzer Prize there. And then I went on to investigative reporting for a couple of major newspapers. And in the course of my career, I did a lot of in-depth reporting on crime and corruption and everything from drug trafficking to organized crime. And eventually, I came to become a freelancer. I did some work for the New York Times, the New York Daily News, others, and I ended up writing a book called The Manchurian Journalist, which turns around and looks at journalism from the perspective of someone with a 50-year career on the front lines of daily news reporting.
That sounds fascinating. So all out of all the events that you have covered, which is the most, I would say, dramatic and fun experience that you had?
Well, it's hard to isolate it into one. I've done such many varied things, and I've learned from all of them. I took on covering prisons,
Oh, that must have been fun.
and in the course of that, over the years, as I got to know inside sources in the prisons and developed a source network looking at human rights issues and abuse, those sorts of things, I ended up trusted by a wide population of inmates within the state prison system in Indiana, and so was called in to negotiate for hostages on death row one night. And after hours of negotiation and conversation in this very dramatic environment, we finished up. We got all the hostages out, got the inmates back into their cells, and I still had 15 minutes for before the last deadline. So I rushed to a telephone, called in my story, and it made the paper.
Wow.
Bannered it the next morning. So those are the kinds of experiences that you hang on to. Though I covered Columbine, I was on the inside of the police investigation into Columbine. I've been privileged to have sources in organized crime and in intelligence, and so it's been a career that's given me a lot of opportunities for a lot of interesting stories.
Well, now, how about JFK assassination? Were you around there for that one?
Well, I wasn't around for it, but when I was in college, I helped put out a small alternative magazine from our college journalism department, and I did do an interview with James Garrison, the New Orleans prosecutor who brought the only charges in the Kennedy assassination. And I just on a whim managed to get through to his office and had an hour-long conversation with him. So that was my first taste of the JFK assassination thing.
And in the 90s, we had a lot of crazy stuff. I'm from LA originally. We've had the Desert story. We had O.J. Simpson story. Were you covering any of those crazy things that were happening in LA at the time, or?
No, I did end up in LA for quite a while back and forth, but I didn't really cover that kind of thing. I covered the Muhammad Ali Larry Holmes fight for the one of the daily newspapers I worked for.
That's cool.
And I did travel a lot and do some interesting things. I was one of the big stories back in the 1980s was the attempted assassination of Vernon Jordan, and it occurred in the town where I was working as a columnist, and I had to be cleared by the FBI as a potential suspect because I had been casually dating the woman that Vernon Jordan was with when he was shot.
Whoops.
I managed to get a column out of that and writing about how I found this witness, the woman, and she had been pursued by all of the major press. And when I finally found her and wrote about her uh, post-assassination attempt, all the national news media packed up and went home. That was the story everybody was after.
Oh, see, and you got a bird's eye view of everything going on.
I
That
did.
must have been fun.
It
So,
was. It was a lot of fun.
so here's a question. A lot of people are talking about AI. How do you feel about AI? Do you use it? Do you want to use it or not?
Well, I haven't used it, and I certainly don't like the idea of it doing the writing or taking over the creative writing for people who are trying to write books or put together magazine stories or news stories. That is worrisome. But I will say that AI offers a lot of other options that were just brought to my attention today by a filmmaker down in LA who I'm working with on a documentary into a series of cold case crimes, and we have massive amounts of trial transcripts from a trial that resulted in a wrongful conviction that's never been overturned. And we have been exploring how to get through all these transcripts and discovered a program today in which we can ask some questions of AI and it will find for us in these massive transcripts the relative material and how it applies to our interests. So I see AI possibilities of working well in certain circumstances, but I don't want to see AI misused and reduce the amount of truth, the narrow amount of truth that we still seem to have in our media.
Yeah, that's how I feel. I mean, it's good for people with disabilities, and it's also good to get researched out if they need more research. Bad side of it is it's taking away the writers, the graphic designers. They're stealing their ideas, and I'm like you. Mixed motions. It's good and it's bad. We don't, you know what I mean? If that
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah. A long-term friend of mine I worked with at the Rocky Mountain News in Colorado stopped by to visit not long ago as he was traveling across country, and he's working on a novel about humans and AI going to war. And he had some interesting ideas on how AI might take over our utilities and our essential infrastructure and use it against us and as humans. And so I thought that was it's certainly a topic of much conversation these days about how it will or has already affected our lives.
I went to a coffee shop the other day by the Capitol. Kid you not, I saw a robot making our coffee for the first time. And I'm like, whoa, what's
Uh,
going on? So they have a robot coffee shop that makes coffee. Here's
uh,
the catch. You have to pay $49 for a prescription. If you a monthly prescription of $49 a month. And the robot's doing his thing. He's asking you, hey, what would you like? What kind of coffee you like? Would you like this? He's doing the hand things. And there's an owner right behind him, just,
Right.
yeah. And I'm like, okay, I guess the wave of the future is here. And I'm like, I've never seen this before. So it used to be like a Starbucks over now. So the Starbucks went out. This robot cafe is taking over now. So
Wow.
yeah,
And that's the
he
quickest coffee, no doubt.
yeah. So
Uh,
he's doing the transactions, he's doing the money thing and everything. And I'm like, this is the wave of the future. So I'm thinking of the Jetsons, because you know how we had Rosie as a robot, yeah, and
right.
now we got this. And it was just weird. It was just so weird. So
I was at a Mexican restaurant in Angola, Indiana, and they had robots that actually served the tables, and it was pretty interesting to watch it unfold. But I missed the waiter.
me too. And their interactions, because they're not going to be able to talk to you. So, and how
That-
do you tip a robot? My
That's
thing.
right.
You give them oil instead of a tip? I don't know.
A little bit of information. I don't know.
So so if you go to the cafe there and if you want to play monthly fee, it's 49.95 a month. I'm like, wow, that's a lot.
That is.
Yeah,
That is.
just for a latte. A simple latte. So
The robot should bring it to you. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And when you're thinking about AI, you just brought up a good point. I'm thinking of the movie Terminator, how the robots are coming after. The same thing that you just said about that. I think it might be coming sooner than later. And then we have the chips are coming, maybe like, so you never know. So, how many books have you written over the past couple of years?
Well, two, the Manchurian Journalist and Street Talk. Street Talk is the collection of columns from the 1980s and details some stories I wrote, one of which was bannered the Chicago Tribune on a Sunday morning about a man who was lost in the Bermuda Triangle for several days, floating adrift, and was rescued. And then the Manchurian Journalist looks into the issue of how the Central Intelligence Agency and its friends within the U.S. and in certain elite circles managed to infiltrate and manipulate the American media, from newspapers and magazines to book publishing to entertainment media, movies, and it identifies a particular situation in which an American journalist who is well known was beneficiary of some of the programs early on that were created in this propaganda network. And as I discovered in the book, a number of our counterculture magazines like Rolling Stone and Texas Monthly also had very close relationships to this network. And so the book examines that in the context of my history in journalism and what journalism has become and what some of the issues are pertaining to what we know about truth and how myths have been created in our own history by those who have an interest in indoctrination as opposed to truthful storytelling.
And where can they buy these lovely books behind you? Behind you?
The Amazon.com, of course, and BarnesandNoble.com online. They're available from the publisher, Trine Day, with TrineDay.com. It's a publisher in Oregon, which is where I'm living these days. And then Street Talk is available also in the same places, and from Britain Publishing, which is in Cincinnati, uh, BritainPublishing.com. They have them directly.
See, I think that's just kind of cool because I'm actually born in 1976, so I saw a lot of things changing throughout the years, and I'm like, oh, organized crime. I didn't know about that until I knew about it, but I didn't know a lot about it because it's not a lot to talk about, because they keep changing the history. Now, if they
Well,
were here today, what would you think? Would it be allowed or not allowed?
to in what sense? To change the to rewrite history?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think some history deserves to be rewritten because I think the original stories we got weren't exactly accurate, and I can testify to that with something of a story and a book that I'm still working on and have for quite some time. But it's about the myth of Al Capone. And everyone thinks about Chicago organized crime. They immediately think about Al Capone and the Prohibition era and how Al Capone ran the Chicago mob and was big into its creation and development, but that's mostly a myth. That Al Capone was certainly a central figure in the Chicago organized crime, but he was never the leader of the Chicago mob.
Oh, I didn't know that.
No, no, nor do most people. And the only way that I found out about it was going inside the Chicago mob with the help of a mentor who had been Jimmy Hoffa's liaison to the Chicago mob years later, and who was the midnight pinnacle partner of Tony Accardo, known as Big Tuna, who was the titular head of the Chicago mob in the 60s and 70s into the Sam Giancana era. And uh, and so the this individual who became something of a mentor to me that I met by chance and who told me first off that all journalists were liars and then spent number of years describing to me why he thought so. And he eventually introduced me to people who led me to the true story of who ran the Chicago mob. And it was run by a Russian Jew named Jake Guzik, who in his youth had been a concert quality piano player, but ended up playing ragtime piano in the old First Ward in Chicago, where he met all of the elements of the original organized crime network in Chicago. So my mentor's argument was that the Chicago mob was always multi-ethnic and that it was never Italian. And he was offended by the idea, being Italian himself, that Italians were blamed for everything. But he was also an interesting character in and of himself. When he passed away in Chicago, both papers wrote obituaries about him, and they both described him as one of the most knowledgeable rare book collectors the city had ever seen. He was the University of Oklahoma's go-to guy on valuing rare texts. And they neither ever mentioned anything about his association with organized crime or his links into the hierarchy of the crime network.
So
So
he kind of kept it cool, but still doing his job at the same time, and nobody knew about it, which is kind of cool.
I,
Eh,
I finished writing a book about that, and I'm working to finish the typescript and then hopefully take it out and look for a publisher.
I know, I'm looking forward to it. Will it be on audio format or would it be?
I would hope that it would be. I've been thinking about that because several people I've talked to about the book Street Talk said, well, you ought to take those columns and turn them into an audiobook because they might be interesting listening for people as they're driving about and
See, this is basically this is what the show is about. So we do both audio and we do, both do video for those who have problems with the visual or blind. So, and just to let you guys know, it is National Employment Disability Awareness Month, also National Bully Month, and Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So we got a lot of stuff going on. I know you worked with a lot of people back in the 80s and 90s. They didn't make a big deal as they did today, right? With all the
as far as
like breast cancer because you didn't know about it, you didn't know about that. You know what I mean? They
well,
just, yeah.
when I started in newsrooms, they were smoke filled. Everyone smoked in self defense, pipes, cigars, and cigarettes, and it was, nobody paid much attention to that. And that was in the beginning of the 70s, the end of the 60s, and that was just normal behavior. You also, I mean, there was a lot of things of which awareness had not yet sunk in, and we've been.
I think at the time for the 80s, a big concern was the hype of HIV because it was just barely starting out. And did you do any national coverage on that or not really?
No, but HIV affected my own family. My brother-in-law was a singer and dancer in New York, and he passed of HIV, and many of his friends, and we were sort of at that time becoming very aware of what those circumstances were, and sort of witnessing the cultural influences that as it was unfolding. I didn't really report too much on those sorts of social things. It was more in the areas of justice and that genre. But certainly, I did report and write on things that affected disabilities, people in their struggles in daily life, and just in the experiences of what they lived, especially when I was doing investigations into mental health help or lack of it, and into addiction-driven drug
Yeah.
network.
This is where I think AI would come into that picture.
Mhm.
More awareness, more resources out there. Whereas, like you said, if somebody is trying to write a book and they have trouble writing the book, that may be a good tool for them. You know what I mean? So I guess it depends on different people and different atmosphere, how they are comfortable with it. So if that
It,
makes sense.
it does, and I can see a value in helping someone who does struggle with the ability to tell their story, and I think that's important to try to develop, just as we would in other ways try to develop assistance for people as we should, to give some equality and generosity to the world around us.
Now, which famous person do you admire and would like to interview next? If you had a choice. If you had a choice.
Famous, living or dead.
Yep.
That's a difficult one. I suppose I probably would go historical, and maybe I'd want to interview Al Capone himself.
There you go. A lot of people would like that.
Let's see,
Who knows? You might find a robot after him. I don't know. You never know.
would be very long of all the people that I can think of that I'd like to sit down and talk with.
Well, how about Michael Jackson?
Yeah, that would be an interesting interview. So many of those things. Um, I just requested an interview today with an author who's made some waves with a couple of his books. A former police officer from Colorado Springs who wrote The Black Klansman, and now has a new book out on his experience investigating the underworld of Salt Lake City and Ogden, Utah.
Wow, that's kind of cool. So, okay, my take is, are you a fan of wrestling? Do you like wrestling?
Well, I was a wrestler when I was in junior high school, the high school type wrestling. I can't say I was ever a fan, but I did like the theater of it.
What do you think of Vince McMahon now?
I couldn't render it.
Well, it was a question I asked, so that wasn't it. Okay. You see, those are the questions. Vince McMahon just recently did a documentary, and he's been in a paper a lot too. So, everybody has a story, everybody has their choices. It depends on how you look at it in retrospective. And then, like, again, a lot of things back in the 80s are now coming back retro.
Yeah,
So, and the stuff that they did on television or crime, I don't think it would be legit today because of all the stuff, you know, all the concerned parents or whatever people are out there, they wouldn't have accepted it
yeah.
today. What do you think?
I agree. Values do change, although a lot of things that are accepted today, I think wouldn't have been accepted then as well. Um, I think as far as awareness in terms of recognition of what we're actually saying when we say things or characterize things, we certainly have come to a place of, I think, more sensitivity, and with that has come a real, I think, more soulful recognition of where we are as human beings in our relationship to each other. And I think those things are advances in good, but we still have a long way to go.
Yes. And then my question is, do you believe there are aliens out there?
Aliens. Well, I, have always operated on the idea of being able to document those things I say. I was never one to render too many opinions. I really like to report on what I can see and say. From a visual world, I have no idea the likelihood of there being aliens as we might imagine them. But I think I'm experienced enough after 75 years to know that there are some kinds of forces moving about us that we don't understand and that we can't see. And I think whether or not those qualify as alien beings, alien influences, or how we create them in our mind's eye so that we have a picture of what they may look like to us visually. I do think that forces out in the atmosphere, if you will, however you describe that term, are alive, then certainly we feel their presence, at least if we don't see it.
So that brings up to my next question. Have you ever been close to the Area 51?
I've driven through it a few times, actually, driving through New Mexico or nearby it, however close you can get on the common roads. But spooky things do happen. I've seen a few spooky things myself, and what do they mean? What are they? I think part of the enjoyment of this world is considering that there are things that we don't know or can't understand or readily explain, and exploring those ideas brings a certain richness to our imaginations.
These and this is what the awareness show is about. We put people on the spot, but at the same time we make it fun. And so my next question is,
Mhm.
if they want to become a serious writer, the students or anybody, what do you recommend and what advice can you give them?
Well, if you want to experience the evolution of becoming a serious writer, I think, like Emerson said, you have to be like the cow that's wet by every storm and blown by every wind. Uh, Hemingway said, and it was an influence on me, that you got to write what you know. And so if you don't know anything, it makes it hard to write.
Yep.
Uh, Imaginations are wonderful and they take us places, but the kind of writing that I like is at least informed by experience. And so, I think that wherever potential writers are, whatever phase of life they're in, they have a unique place in which to view the world, and they should appreciate that even if it seems ordinary or mundane to them, if they're looking at the world from underneath the car bay at the Jiffy Lube, you know, they're still,
Yeah.
they're still seeing the world in ways that not all of us see. And recognizing what is a story, I think, is important. And I think so. Journalism helped inform me in that process because the dynamics, the hardcore infrastructure of writing news under deadline, the old inverted pyramid, in which you got the most of the story up front and trailed off with detail as you went to the bottom. Those were lessons that taught me brevity and clarity and things like that. But like my old English tutor tried to tell me and did tell me, um, I think to become a serious writer, you've got to be uh, able to see and feel things about the world and trust your instincts and be knowledgeable and
Knowledgeable and resources.
and know resources and do your research and determine what is true and work from that foundation.
And then my next question is, before computers, did you have a lot of notebooks? How did you get the stories? I mean, what did you use for tools? You didn't have internet. What were your basic tools?
Well, the basic tools were the infrastructure of the reporting system. So When I walked into a newsroom for the first time and they said, "Kid, you're covering cops," and they gave you a skinny little notebook that had a spiral ring on the top and a cardboard cover and back, and was pretty thin and would fit in your back pocket with your pencil, so that everywhere you went, you had your pen and pad, and you could jot down notes because you were going to be working a constant shift all night. And when you got the opportunity to get back into the newsroom to actually write your stories, you were going to be pounding them out on a typewriter that had been in that newsroom already for 20 years, and it weighed 25 pounds. And you used newsprint from excess rolls from the presses. They would cut off the ends of the rolls, and then they would turn that into copy paper, and they would cut it into sheets, and as we were writing stories, so that pages didn't get lost, we'd use rubber cement and we'd glue the ends of the paper together so that it made one long story. And then it would go to editors who edited it with pencil, and they put the copy in a pneumatic tube and sent it upstairs where there were linotype operators who grabbed it off and typed it off on machines that produced lead lines of type.
I see.
And that,
That's kind of cool.
yeah, and my experience in that was the very last days of that technology, and it was the technology that had been around for decades and decades. It's the technology of the old black and white movies of the 30s and 40s and 50s, of the old newsrooms, and the Philadelphia story and all that. But those things quickly transitioned into computers, and I watched that evolution into those very first things, in which we had uh, devices that created tapes with selectric
Yep.
typewriters. Those tapes would then be fed into computers, and type would be set that way. And then we evolved into the screens and the keyboards, and on into processes like that.
See
So that,
that? Yeah. Nowadays, kids won't know that. They
yeah.
think, oh, that's ancient. That's history. We don't need to know that stuff. And I'm thinking, what if your electronics go out? You have no power.
And so I just read an interesting story about the idea that reestablishing newspapers that actually produce print that you can carry around with you and still read, even if the power goes out, might not be a bad idea after all. Now that we got better ideas on how not to destroy forests by in order to make newsprint. So maybe there's some hope for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I had an electric word processor, so I would be using the old word processor, and then I'd be using the whiteout tape or whatever to do that. And then once we got into high school, we started using the computers, and that's when they were training us. And they're like, "Oh, that's so old." I'm like, "No, it's not old." Believe it or not, I went in the garage and I found my old computer with the floppy disk and the CD-ROM, and my dad built it, by the way. It was an e-machine. And I'm like, I wonder if it still works, but I'm not gonna try it because it's been what, since 1990s since we had that computer, so I don't know. So nowadays the kids have a live scribe pen, which actually records, and this is a good tool for people with disability because it plays back what you write, and it's also a podcast. You can
Yeah.
get that on Amazon. I'll send you the pictures, real cool. I use that for taking tests, and then also they have the passports instead of floppy disk now. So you want to get that and a USB pen. We don't even use USB drives anymore, so
Yeah.
everything's on the cloud. I'm like, what happens if the power goes out? Then what? You know?
Any except, well, I have a lot of investigative records stacked up in box after box in my garage, and the film producer I'm working with said, "Well, we should digitalize everything, and that way you can search it so much more quickly."
Yeah, good luck with that. I had my medical records and we keep them and we don't throw any away because you never know when you're gonna need it. So it's interesting how technology is so different now than it was back then. You know, you can record now on your phone where you didn't have to. You know, and it's kind of difficult. So
Well, I've been talking about the changes in journalism recently and the in different forums, and one of the points that I've been bringing up is that we have lost in as the institutional structure of journalism has declined, we've lost the kind of reporting that went beyond just the major stories or interesting stories of the day, but newspapers used to publish statistics. And the statistics were a list of who filed a criminal complaint or a civil complaint in the local courts, or marriages and divorces, or records of property transactions, or other things, or bids made to the city. And so, as an investigative reporter, when I look back decades for information, I go back to those old statistic pages to find certain kinds of things and licenses that might have been granted to taverns or things that were published in the paper. Otherwise, the research is extraordinarily difficult. But now we're losing all that because no one publishes those things anymore. And maybe there are other ways to search them more recently, but I haven't found a good method as of yet.
Ah, yeah. I don't know. It's like, and then we have the encyclopedias, which is good. Now we don't have those anymore. You know, it's like
There are many changes in this
it,
media.
it, it changes. All right, Daniel, we're almost out of time. And on a final note, do you have a YouTube channel? Where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm on X at Danielle UZadder, and I'm just building a website, which is danluzadder.com. I'm just putting the finishing touches on that, so I'll be able to communicate with people. And otherwise, you can reach me through the publisher at tryandade.com, and most of the things I've been working on are available out there somewhere. You can find some reference to those.
Do you have a Facebook page they can find you?
I don't have a Facebook page.
Okay. I'm just asking because you never know these days. You never.
Well, I haven't kept up with my two youngest kids in their explorations of social media, so I am on Instagram, but
I'm gonna have to follow you. I'm not gonna stalk you. I'm just gonna follow you.
that'd be wonderful, and I'll follow you back.
Yes. So on the awareness show, we're all over the platform. We have iHeart, we have Apple product, Spotify, YouTube. We're getting our name out there. Again, thank you, Daniel. I love talking to you, and I want to follow up with you with your book when it's all finished and your
Wonderful,
website.
wonderful. Well, thank you very much for having me. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. I hope you have a good day and stay out on the hot weather.
Take care.
You too. Bye bye.